Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, this was always the toughest night of the year for you and I when Ole Miss and Auburn take on each other. Also, a tough day in my household as my wife is a very serious Ole Miss fan. And of course, Ole Miss my number two team, but Auburn's my number one team. And that was a rough game in a lot of ways. Of course, I was happy that Auburn won. But there's a lot of things to take away from it. On the Ole Miss side of it, that we're bad. I joked with a lot of my friends after that game that Lane Kiffin needs to burn that analytics book because that's his two losses this year are because he keeps going for it on fourth down and frankly what I think are ridiculous situations. I think that's the first takeaway I have from this game is one of the biggest things that, we didn't have a show last week, so we didn't talk about this. But one of the things I liked most about Auburn in this game and why I kind of thought they would win this game by 10 plus points is they had the best fourth down defense in America, and Ole Miss goes for it the most on fourth down. And so in my eyes, that was a huge advantage for Auburn. You knew the way that Lane Kiffin was, how aggressive he was as a play caller and going for it. And even going against a team like Auburn that's shown it, they don't give up fourth downs very often, especially in the red zone. You knew he was still going to do it, and yet he still did it anyway. And you can talk about what you won in that game. I know there's a lot of people were mad about some of the calls in that game, and Auburn did get a lot of calls from the refs. But the biggest factor I look at is 4 times Lane Kiffin went for it in the red zone on fourth down, and he only got it 1 time. And that's 9 points thrown away right there. And then you also throw in the interception. And what was the final spread on the game? That's 11 points. Let's say you kick a field goal in all those circumstances. What happens? You win the game by a point. So, in my mind, you got 4th and 7 on the 18. How could you possibly decide to go for that? 4th and 3, kick the field goal. I'm a bigger proponent of when you're on the road, kick field goals. I thought the biggest mistake that Ole Miss made against Alabama was on that opening drive. Why did they go for it there? What's wrong with being up 3-0 on Alabama in Bryant-Denny Stadium? Moreover, let's even talk about at Auburn at the end of the game after you've already missed 2. You have to get 11 points anyway. What's wrong with being down by 8 with that minute, like 4.5 minutes left when he did it? And, I thought that Auburn was the better team and they deserved to win the game. But, a big factor in it was Lane Kiffin's decisions on fourth down, which really cost him.
Yes. I would say that kind of building off that point, I had kind of 3 takeaways for kind of 3 different levels of the game. When I watched the first half, I was thinking to myself, well, this is kind of playing out the way I expected. Auburn's kind of imposing their will on offense. Ole Miss can't stop them. They're playing bad on defense. And then Corral gets hurt was the second thing. And I was like, well, then Ole Miss has no chance. But then just miraculously, I was about as stunned that he came back as I was that Max Fried, was fine with that ankle last night in the World Series. And Corral comes back just stunning and, plays decently. But then in the second half, Ole Miss's defense woke up and they held Auburn, just miraculously to 3 points. It's not like Auburn played just bad, but Ole Miss, played a little bit better on defense. And I felt like Ole Miss, to your point, on red zone opportunities, they had chance after chance. And it frustrated me similar to some games. I remember when Hugh Freeze was at Ole Miss, he would always sometimes go for it instead of kick field goals. Like I remember a game at Alabama back in 2013 when Ole Miss lost 25-0, and it felt a lot closer than that because Ole Miss kept moving the ball, but they never scored any points because they kept going for it on fourth down. And that's kind of the way Lane Kiffin played that entire second half. And it just made no sense at all. I think you make a good point about when you're down by 11, you need 2 scores anyway. Why not kick a field goal and then make it an 8-point lead at the point that you don't get it with 4 minutes to go? The game's pretty much over. And so, I found that to be highly questionable.
Well, and Joe, I even feel like the interception by Matt Corral was a cancerous output of the desperation that Kiffin was showing in that game, because I haven't seen Corral do that this year. He did that a lot last year where he'd break out of the pocket and throw across his body and telegraph a pass. That looks like a lot what he did last year when he was throwing 7 interceptions against Arkansas, a couple against Auburn, 4 against LSU. And I knew as soon as he threw that pass, it was going to get intercepted. You could just tell because you can't do that when you're playing a good secondary. And Auburn's got one of the best secondaries in America. Roger McCreary is a first-round draft pick. It wasn't even him that intercepted it. You got Smoke Monday. There's a lot of really good guys on the backside of Auburn's defense. And when you throw it across your body like that, you're just begging to get picked, especially when you telegraph it. And he hasn't done that, but I almost feel like that was, like I said, just kind of an offshoot of the desperation that was being shown by Kiffin going for it so much in that game. And, the sad part about it is Ole Miss's field goal kicker's done pretty good this year. I think he's, 9 out of 11? I mean, it's not like they got a kid what was it a couple of weeks ago, the Chiefs, where they couldn't have their kicker like ever. They had to go for it on 2 all the time. They don't have that kind of situation. And so, I like that the Kiffin's aggressive. I don't think that's a bad thing, but you got to choose your spots, read the room. And when you're on the road in one of the most hostile environments in America and you play a defense that's the best 4th down defense in America, kick the field goal.
Right. No, I agree that their kicker is really good. Just a true freshman, but you feel like he's going to be probably a 4-year guy if he doesn't transfer due to his frustration with Lane Kiffin going for it on 4th down.
I think it's going to be hard for Kiffin to sign like a 5-star kicker. I don't think he's going to get the next Carlson coming out of, high school or anything.
Right. Exactly. So, I mean, another thing I would say is that I felt like Kiffin really didn't take advantage of, as far as the play calling, he and Levy with the personnel that they had available, because they've had a lot of injuries, unfortunately, to wide receivers like Mingo and Sanders, and yet they're still trying to throw the football too much. You look at the stat line for Jerrion Ely, I think he had 1 rushing yard the entire night. That cannot happen. Like, he needs to run the football if Ole Miss is going to win a game like that on the road. And so I felt like they were almost stubbornly still trying to call plays like they had a full complement of wide receivers. And because of that, everything they did, they had to really work hard for. Like, the only thing that was working out well was, some slant routes to Dontario Drummond for a few yards. Like, everything was difficult. But on the flip side, I mean, I was impressed, with Bo Nix. That opening drive, I was really impressed when Auburn scored, how Bo Nix, I think it was on 3rd down, he evaded a couple of defenders who almost sacked him. And I felt like when he extended that drive there, that ended up being a big moment ultimately in the game.
Yeah, Joe, I thought that opening drive of the first half, and then what impressed me the most out of the entire game and what I, in my mind, knew we were going to win the game was the last drive of the first half when Ole Miss had gotten on a run, scored 2 touchdowns in a row, and the lead was 21-17. And Auburn scored with 11 seconds left in a 2-minute drill, scored with not enough time for Ole Miss to do anything. And the play that they scored on about the 10-yard pass to Jarquez Hunter, and he ran it in, I thought that was a great play call. And I thought that was the best drive of the night for Auburn. And the play calling by Bobo, I thought was like dead on with that. And I thought that Auburn's offense in the first half of that game was a championship level offense. Now they took some steps back in the second half. One of the drives they were moving the ball well, and then I think I can't remember if it was Sam Montgomery, but somebody made a great job stripping the ball from Kobe Hudson, who as talented as I think he is. I think Harsin ought to send him on the bench for a game because Hudson's fumbled the ball in very important times, multiple times this year. He's the one who fumbled it on that opening play of the second half against Penn State, which I think cost Auburn that football game. But, I thought the offense was excellent in the first half, and Ole Miss obviously made some adjustments in the second half, but not as good then. But I thought the best drive of the season for Auburn was the very last drive in the first half to get up 28-17.
Yeah, I mean, that was really impressive. Like, I really thought they imposed their will, for the most part against Ole Miss on offense in that first half.
Yeah. Well, Joe, speaking of imposing your will, I mean, that was a great win for Auburn. It's got them at number 13 in the college football playoff rankings. There's a team that came in at number 17 in the college football playoff rankings that I never even thought we'd be talking about at this point in the season in terms of being ranked, and especially in terms of getting a win as impressive as that is. And we're going to go to the other side of Mississippi and talk about Mississippi State. What a great win they had against a Kentucky team, which, frankly, I couldn't believe that Mississippi State was favored in that game against Kentucky. I didn't know where that was coming from. And they went out and they beat Kentucky by 2 touchdowns. And the only team that's beaten Kentucky like that this year was Georgia. And Kentucky, of course, very tough team to beat badly. They don't make a lot of mistakes. And that's an impressive win to beat a Kentucky team by 2 touchdowns with the way their defense is, the way they run ball control offense, the disciplined way they play. And I mean, I'm so impressed by Will Rogers right now. He throws for 36 of 39 against a Kentucky defense, 2 separate stretches where he threw for 15 completions in a row. I mean, just what an excellent performance by Rogers and great win for the Mississippi State Bulldogs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're getting a lot of momentum, like a wave of momentum kind of unexpectedly down the stretch of the season. Like, you saw the Vanderbilt score, and I was like, it's Vanderbilt. But at the same time, even that game, I was surprised and impressed by the margin of victory, beating Vanderbilt by 40 points. Like, I thought, State a month ago might just beat a bad Vandy team by like 20 points. And so that was a sign for me. And then even more of a sign overwhelmingly when they beat Kentucky the way they did. And to your point, Will Rogers looks so good, so sharp, so efficient. I've always thought he's a great passer, and he plays, with a good offense for a passer with Mike Leach. It was just like, could he get more efficient as far as accuracy? And he's done that this year. And so now, like, as an Ole Miss fan, I'm extremely concerned about the Egg Bowl now. With it being in Starkville, I feel like State has a lot of momentum.
They do, Joe. And I want to throw out another crazy stat from that game. Not only did Will Rogers have one of the greatest passing performances in SEC history, at this point in his career, he already has as many 300 passing yard games as Dak Prescott. And I think he already has as many touchdown passes as Dak Prescott at Mississippi State. Crazy stat that came out. But this one I thought was even more nuts. They ran the ball 35 times, Joe. When does that happen with Mississippi State football under Mike Leach? When has Mike Leach ever ran the ball 35 times? But you know what? That was part of the brilliance of it because Kentucky played that soft zone because they never run the ball. And that was one of the main things that moved their offense in that game and gave Will Rogers the ability to do that as the success. And it's so weird to say that, the success that Mississippi State had running the football in that game.
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah, all great points. I mean, Kentucky, to me, just showed like a complete 180 of the team they had been most of the season. Maybe it's coming off the Georgia game. I don't know. But I thought Kentucky had a really good chance, to get to 10 wins. Now I don't know after this game. Now Mississippi State, I feel like they're a team that could knock somebody off, the rest of the season. Like they're going to be a threat to whoever they play now.
Yeah, Joe, that's one that, if Auburn is to get past A&M this weekend, I'm worried about that game coming up, having to play them after this brutal gauntlet they've gone through. Joe, speaking of a brutal game, what was the best game of the weekend, and I mean this in all honesty, even though I'm an SEC guy, the Michigan State game was just a great football game. Excellent atmosphere that they had in Sparty Land up in East Lansing. Of course, he had game day there. And it was an amazing football game. And I was so impressed with the way that Mel Tucker rallied the troops down 16 points. And he made some very bold play calls in that. I mean, they were down by 16 and 4th and 8. He didn't kick the field goal. He went for the first down, ended up getting it down to the 1 yard line, which I thought was kind of the play of that game. And he showed a lot of resilience and showed the toughness that they have right now with Michigan State football. And I really think that there's no way that they should give the Heisman Trophy to anybody but Kenneth Walker now after that game that he had. I think he should be the clear number one. Bryce Young, to me, he's on a good team, but he hasn't done enough for him to really separate himself for me. Matt Corral, I think that he had his chance for a Heisman moment against Auburn coming back, but didn't get it done right there. And meanwhile, in the biggest game of the season for Michigan State against their main rival, he runs for 196 yards and 5 touchdowns. He had his Heisman moment. And right now, I think it's going to take a lot of work for anyone else to get it away from him. But, come away from that game, I was so impressed with Michigan State's resilience, with Kenneth Walker, and with the coaching ability of Mel Tucker. And yet again, in a big game, Jim Harbaugh fails and doesn't get it done. And it's kind of been the story of his career at Michigan, that he's gotten into these games, but he just can't win them.
Yeah, that's pretty much the narrative, on repeat. unfortunately for Michigan, they have early lead and Michigan State comes back. And you're right. I mean, Kenneth Walker, I think, has to be the Heisman favorite right now. Like I heard, kind of flirtations over the last month from people saying he might have a chance to get in the discussion. But I mean, with 5 touchdowns in a game like that, he has to be right there as one of the front runners, if not the front runner. I think that they play Ohio State in a couple of weeks when he plays Stroud. I think that game is going to have a lot to do with deciding who wins the Heisman. If we see, another performance like this or anywhere close like this from Kenneth Walker.
And Joe, going to Harbaugh, I mean, I've always been a big Jim Harbaugh fan. I think, I kind of like the guys that are brazen, like him and Kiffin, that talk a lot of trash, that are, have all that kind of confidence in themselves. I've always thought he was an interesting coach, and I want him to succeed so much. And I was so hard cheering for Michigan in that game. I wanted them to win for Harbaugh. And there were 2 plays in that game that cost them. And I don't know why Harbaugh did this, because I thought Cade McNamara was playing excellent in that football game against a good Michigan State defense. And twice he put in his backup quarterback, McCarthy, and both times he put this McCarthy kid in the game, he fumbled it. And both times Michigan State got the ball. And I couldn't believe that you put him back out there after he fumbled the first time, when that's the only play you inserted him in the game. I mean, you don't get limited opportunities in a game like this against an opponent like that. And why on earth would you put him back in the game? I thought it was stupid to put him in the first time because McNamara was playing the way he was. But, he put him in there twice. And you have that paired with a very strange overruling of a touchdown that Michigan had on a fumble recovery that would have put them up by 3 scores and probably effectively sealed that game early in the first half. And then on Kenneth Walker, one of his touchdowns, he fumbled it, but they gave it to him. That was the play, what sealed it. But in my mind, the 2 McCarthy fumbles were what sealed that game, and I think that was coaching. That was Harbaugh's decision to have him out there, and that I thought cost him the game.
Yeah, it's costly, and it also, some plays like that, when you bring somebody else in, it's like a wasted down. Even if you don't have a turnover, I always feel like a lot of times those gimmicky plays, you lose yardage.
And, like I said, the sad part about that, I watched that game, and as someone that is completely neutral, I like Harbaugh. I want him to be successful. But, I've always liked Michigan State, too. I've never had any problems with them. I saw that Michigan State had the best player in the field in Kenneth Walker and had the best coach on the sidelines, but that Michigan was a better football team. And that's my takeaway from that game. And to me, that's an indictment on Jim Harbaugh. And it also is a huge feather in the cap of Mel Tucker, and why I think if you're LSU, you need to go all in on him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think he has a good chance to follow Saban from Michigan State to LSU.
All right, Joe, speaking of great coaching, we talked about what Brian Harsin did in getting that big win against Ole Miss. He had, of course, had a big win the couple weeks before that against Arkansas. And now is his chance against Texas A&M. I think if he wins this game, he probably gets SEC Coach of the Year if he can beat Texas A&M. But this is a tougher matchup right here. Texas A&M has, we'd heard our friend Jack talk about it earlier in one of our earlier podcasts tonight. They have the 4th best defense in America with Tim Elko, great defensive coordinator. Of course, A&M has been hot lately. They beat Alabama, and they followed it up with very strong victories over Missouri, and I think they beat Mississippi State too, if I'm not mistaken.
A state beat them, I think.
No. They beat Mississippi State. They beat somebody else in between that, though, too. Texas A&M, because they lost to Arkansas and Mississippi State, and then they came in later and they beat Vanderbilt and someone else pretty impressively. I think it was Missouri.
Yes.
And so Vanderbilt right now, Texas A&M, Zach Calzada is playing a lot better. He showed it in the Alabama game, and he's been better since then. Of course, they have dynamic running backs and Devin Achane and C.J. Spiller. And, of course, that defense you have is showing out. And, of course, they have one all-star receiver in Anais Smith. He's also a good punt returner. And this is a very fascinating game. It's a tale of 2 teams that had losses earlier in the season. Auburn had 2 losses that were expected. Penn State was one that I thought it was kind of a coin flip type game. But I'll be honest, once I got up and I saw that environment, I knew we were in a lot of trouble on that one. And I feel like now looking back on it, we had a better team than Penn State did. I really feel like that fumble in the very beginning of the second half is what cost us. But Penn State was a very good football team, and I think that their 5-3 record is a little misleading. I think a lot of that is on Sean Clifford. That he made such a difference to that football team, and with Sean Clifford, they're a legit top 10 team. And of course, Georgia is a behemoth, and they're the greatest thing in college football right now. We didn't get to talk about that Georgia-Florida win, but man, Georgia looked impressive in that. And Dan Mullins looks like he's going south in Florida. But I'm saying that's the two losses Auburn had. And you look at A&M, meanwhile, they had two losses that were completely out of the blue. They lost to Mississippi State. Nobody understood that. That lost to Arkansas. I mean, they were pathetic on offense in that game. And against Colorado, they barely beat a Colorado team who's one of the worst teams in the Pac-12 right now. And so you're seeing a tale of two halves. I think more so with A&M. Auburn had a little bit of a rough start to their season also. And these are the two hottest teams, I think, in the SEC right now. So now you get to see them in prime time. I kind of thought this should have been the college game day game of the week. I know they gave it to Cincinnati probably because of the release of the rankings was the idea with it. But I think this is the best game of the weekend. And I think this is going to be quite a great affair. And Auburn will get to see an environment that's very similar to what they saw in Penn State, with A&M being, I think, the fourth biggest stadium in America, with, Beaver Stadium and Penn State being the second. So I think this is going to be just an absolutely fantastic football game. And let me get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that I'm concerned for Auburn with it being on the road at A&M. I think that, like you said, A&M has been playing really well. I think about, Alabama losing out there. But at the end of the day, I'm probably going to lean towards Auburn for this reason. I'm convinced that the Iron Bowl, as it often does, is going to decide the SEC West champion. And the only way that happens is if Auburn wins this game and matches up against Alabama, and the winner of that game wins the West. And so I think Auburn will find a way somehow to win at A&M in a raucous environment in what will be a classic game.
Yeah, Joe, I think this is going to be a great game. And I was so negative on Bo Nix in the beginning of the year. I wanted TJ Finley to start against LSU, and of course, that was when Bo had his swan song moment. He came back and did everything he could to break the hex in Baton Rouge, and what was just such a defining win for his career and for Brian Harson's first season as a coach. And then he's followed it up with excellent performances against Arkansas, and really just a great performance in the first half against Ole Miss. And he didn't do anything wrong in the second half, just not, the offense wasn't clicking as much. But the point that I'm making is Bo Nix has turned a corner. I think that he's one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC now, and maybe one of the better quarterbacks in America with the way he's playing. He's got such a steadier feet right now. He's not doing the thing where he runs outside immediately, but he also has great legs, and he's doing a great job of scoring touchdowns with his feet. He did it against Ole Miss. He did 2 against Arkansas. And I think he's really explored that other part of his game, but controlled it. And when I look at this quarterback matchup, he is by far the better quarterback between him and Zach Calzada. And I think in games of this magnitude, what it comes down to is going to be quarterback play. Auburn has a great defense. Texas A&M has a great defense. It's not going to be a 40-38 game, but I think that when the chips fall down, I trust Bo Nix in this game to make the plays when it matters versus Zach Calzada playing what may be a top 5 secondary in America. I look for him to throw 1 to 2 interceptions in this game and there to be multiple turnovers on their part. I think if Texas A&M is going to win this game, then they're going to have to get either A-Chain or Spiller to have over 100 yards on the ground.
Yeah, I think so too. Spiller's kind of the key for A&M. As he goes, their offense goes. And I think, your point about Bo Nix kind of building off that, I feel like I've seen just even more and more strides with his creativity and improvisational skills, with his ability to get away from defenders and make something happen with nothing. And so I think that bodes well for Auburn. You talked about the defenses for both teams being really stellar. I agree with that. So I think, we'll have kind of a subpar scoring game. I'm going to lean towards Auburn ever so slightly, 23-20 Auburn over A&M.
Well, Joe, it's amazing that you say 23-20. I got Auburn winning this game 24-21. So that's kind of what I was thinking on this. I think it's going to be a good defensive, old school game, and you're going to see a late score by Auburn decide it. And like I said, I think Bo Nix is going to have a good performance in this one, a good workmanlike performance, and he's not going to make mistakes. And meanwhile, I see Zach Calzada making one or two potentially fatal mistakes in this game.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because after all, even Matt Corral threw an interception against this Auburn defense. So that's what I think is going to happen. And I think what they've shown on fourth down is going to make a difference. If it's a 4th and 1, even with the running backs that A&M has, I like Auburn's defense to make that stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
All right, Joe. The last game that I really wanted to talk about for this week is going to Big Ten land. Is Michigan State and Purdue. So Michigan State coming off their huge win that they had last week against Michigan. Suddenly Michigan State's number 3 in the college football playoff rankings. Everyone's eyes are on them. Mel Tucker is the darling of America. Every school is calling him to be their new head coach. A lot of pressure right there. A lot of pressure that Michigan State is not used to getting. Even when they made the playoff before with Mark D'Antonio, they never had this much spotlight on them. They never had a game like what they had against Michigan last week. And Purdue, meanwhile, they're a silent giant killer, Joe. When Purdue takes on the number 2 ranked team, they have a weird record where they've beaten them like 7. They have the most wins of any program against the number 2 ranked team when they're unranked. It's a weird stat they had, and they beat Iowa again this year. Of course, they beat Ohio State a couple years ago. I watched this Purdue team last week play a desperate Nebraska team on the road and get a win. There's a reason that they pay, the Purdue coach, Jeff Brom, $7 million a year to be there. The guy gets a lot done with very little. They've got one of the best quarterbacks in America. And, Joe, I'm calling for a big upset right here. Purdue's going to take out hot Michigan State because hot Michigan State can't help but look at themselves in the mirror and look at themselves in the newspapers everywhere. And Mel Tucker's taking too many calls from LSU and USC to be focused. And I like the Boilermakers in a huge upset in this game.
Wow. I mean, that really would be something. How do you think that result would impact Kenneth Walker's Heisman chances?
That's a good question, Joe. I think that would put a huge barrier in that Heisman, because I mean, I think his Heisman is dependent upon Michigan State making the playoff. I think I don't think it should be based on what he's done, because, Joe, when I watched that game last week, he is their offense. They have a subpar quarterback. They don't have any receiving talent. They can only go as far as Kenneth Walker can take them. And so I think right now he's definitely the clear Heisman front runner, but I think he only gets it if they make the playoffs. So, yeah, I think that if they lose this game, which I'm predicting to do, his Heisman chances are going to take a severe hit unless they can somehow get back in the playoff discussion later.
Okay, I could see that. So the hard thing I had about this game, as I told you before the show, I look at the line in this game. It really surprised me that it's just a 2.5. And the reason I say that is I would have anticipated maybe like 6 or 7, because then I could have easily picked Purdue to cover and make it a close game. But 2.5, like that's just tough. Like, because I'm like, if I pick Purdue to cover, that's Michigan State to win by what, like 1 point?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just hard to pick this game for those reasons. And then, like, the points you bring up about Purdue having good quarterback play, their sneaky good record historically against number 2 teams.
Caused a lot of turnovers, and Michigan State's quarterback's pretty turnover prone.
Yes, and then Michigan State due for a letdown after last week's win, emotional win, all the hype. So I just don't know, Dan. I'm going to lean towards Michigan State winning, but I mean, any result in this game would not surprise me.
Yeah, Joe, another one that I don't really want to get in depth in the analysis on this one, but I do want to throw out from a line perspective that really threw me for a loop was Mississippi State at Arkansas. They both have 3 losses. Of course, Arkansas has gone a little bit the other way after starting off so hot. Mississippi State's been rising lately after a slow start, including the loss against Memphis and near loss against Louisiana Tech. Arkansas is favored by 5.5 in this one at home. Just quickly, do you think that Mississippi State gets another win in this, or do you think Arkansas is going to right the ship a little bit?
Yeah, that's another tough matchup with
I
it
mean,
being
that's a
at
real
Fayetteville
toss
too.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, that really feels like a toss up. Like that's one where I'd want to do it like a pick 'em, like even. I'm going to say, that Arkansas wins that game. I'm going to kind of surprise myself with that pick, but I'm going to say that Mississippi State is due for a letdown, and I'll also be surprised if they can run the football as well on the road. I could see a scenario where they throw it like 50 times since it's on the road for some reason, and I think Arkansas might be able to squeak that one out and get kind of a resurgence win.
Joe, I think the same thing. I think this is a game where Arkansas wins, but Mississippi State covers. I think that they're that evenly matched. I think that Arkansas probably wins the game by like 3 points. And I think the biggest issue is going to be that for you to beat Arkansas, the teams that have beaten Arkansas are teams that can run the football. No one has beaten Arkansas yet that can't run the football. Auburn was able to run the football, had some success, did it both with Bo Nix and with Jarquez Hunter. Ole Miss was able to do it with Jerry and Ely and Snoop Connor, but no one else that has done it against Arkansas. And of course, Georgia was able to do it with their great running backs. With Cook and with Zeus White, and so that's why Georgia was able to dominate them. But these are teams that can run the football. Since Mississippi State can't do it, I think that's a huge advantage to Arkansas in that one.
Yeah, I think so too. And you just kind of feel like Arkansas is due. Like you just can't imagine them losing like a fourth SEC game the way it's been going.
Right, exactly. All right, Joe, let's close this segment with going with our lines of the week. You and I have talked a little bit about some other lines we have. I threw out there that I like that money line pick for Purdue. Joe, my line of the week, and this is the one that you want to get the second mortgage on the house. You want to go get a title loan for your car. This is the one that you go down the boats and do. Wisconsin. Wisconsin has been one of the hottest teams in America, had a lot of expectations coming into the season. I think everybody thought Big Ten championship, Ohio State and Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a dark horse playoff team. They got a great defense. As always, they're going to run the football well. Everybody thought that their quarterback, Graham Mertz, was a guy that came in very highly touted as a freshman, but kind of has gone by the wayside. They're going to have a great year. They started off terrible. They almost beat Penn State in what was a really beautiful Big Ten, bash it out defensive football game. They lost that one. Then they, got absolutely destroyed by Purdue. By Notre Dame, and especially in that final quarter where Notre Dame put up a lot of defensive touchdowns. And then Wisconsin kind of became a second thought to everybody. Suddenly they get a nice win, and then they against another Big Ten opponent, and then suddenly they beat Purdue. They go out and get a nice win over Purdue, and then they absolutely destroy Iowa last week. They bring Iowa completely back down to earth and show that Iowa's loss to Purdue was not a scattered event. And suddenly Wisconsin is maybe the hottest team in the Big Ten right now, especially on their side of the conference. And they're only favored by 13 points against Rutgers. I think Rutgers has been an improving team. I like Shiano. I think he's a great coach. Obviously, he's the only one at Rutgers that has ever done anything. But, Joe, this Wisconsin team is just burying people right now. 13 points. I like Wisconsin to win this game 20 points plus. I say back the Badgers and lay the points with them, and that's Dan's lock of the week.
Okay. Well, speaking of burying, the one that I'm going with is the Cincinnati-Tulsa game. And Cincinnati, I know, is favored by 22.5. Like, I get that. That's a substantial margin. But I just think there's a lot of motivation from Cincinnati. I think that they're tired, of seeing the rankings at number 6 this week with the College Football Playoff Committee. And on this stage with game day, and then also with them knowing that they've got to get style points. It's not just about winning. They got to win and look great doing it. I think they're going to kind of start that tour. And who knows if they'll make the playoff eventually, but I think they'll look good Saturday. And I think they'll demolish Tulsa.
Joe, I think that's a good pick. Tulsa's coming off a loss to Navy last week, which was a good one for my bet because I took Navy on the money line there, but that was a big upset pick. Tulsa's 3-5. You're right. Cincinnati's got a lot to prove. I think that's going to be a big win for the Bearcats, and I think you're right. I think laying it's the way. And Joe, because I feel like I'm in a gambling kind of mood tonight, I'm going to throw a freebie one out for everybody. We talked about it earlier. Mississippi State had a huge win over Kentucky, beat them by 2 touchdowns. Kentucky has to come right back off that embarrassing loss that ended all chances they had in the East and ended chances of having another great year with Mark Stoops and take on a resurgent Tennessee team. A Tennessee team that had a great chance to beat Ole Miss. That was in the game with Alabama in the fourth quarter. That has demolished other teams in the SEC East, Missouri, and in South Carolina. And Kentucky's favored in this game, Joe. Tennessee is primed for them to get their first signature win of the Josh Heupel era, and it's going to happen against the Wildcats. I think Tennessee on the money line is an awesome pick. Hendon Hooker's playing great football. That Tennessee team is tough. If their fans don't throw trash on the field and stop the game, then I like the Vols to get their first big win of the Heupel area and to take out Stoops Wildcats. So I say take Tennessee on the money line as my bonus Dan pick of the week.
Wow, that wouldn't surprise me. I guess that'd be 3 in a row losses for Kentucky.
That's right. And when we come back, we're going to talk about our Halloween locker room talk, which I'm sure any of you that have been on the internet have read about the story, but Joe and I are going to look at it from a legalistic standpoint, and we'll talk to you a little bit about PA and her monkey in Austin, Texas. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.